basically, I have product and design services that elaborates. I get to work with a lot of different organizations, run a lot of design sprints as well, which is why this lines up really well in terms of prototyping. I get to work with a lot of startups as well, and all various sizes of organizations, tackling different problems. A lot of them do use prototyping, but they don't all use prototyping in the best way possible, often using techniques that might be quite wasteful in their approach, particularly applying the wrong approach to prototyping or the wrong approach to experimentation to different scenarios. So some of the things you might see as we're getting this up. Oh, sorry, question. Why do we prototype? Any call-outs? Why would you prototype?
See it in action.
Yeah, to see it in action. Sure. Anything else? Or when you're trying to see it in action, what are you trying to see?
See if it works.
See if it works, yeah. What else might you be trying to do? Get feedback.
Iterate.
What was that?
Iterate.
Iterate, yeah. So see what doesn't work and what you should change.
Yeah, it's not registered.
Yeah, that's an awesome one. Yeah, getting buy-in. So getting buy-in from customers, from internal stakeholders is a big one, especially if you work in large corporates. They love their prototypes for internal buy-in. Any other reasons you don't keep prototyping?
This one. It's not registering. There's a...
Yeah, bingo. Yes. Yeah, that's perfect. Cool. Anything else?
Test your assumption.
Yes. Testing assumptions is one of the biggest ones. So we spoke about a lot of things. They all kind of fit into the learning space. You're basically trying to avoid risk by learning as much information as possible without building the real thing, right? We see that with a lot of organizations where they go out, they actually build the real thing, go up and launch it, and then they end up losing a whole lot of money because it didn't actually work. They didn't go in and figure out what was what I call the laziest way they could test their assumptions before taking it forward. So as we're going through here, so what this talk is going to go through is what are the different types of things you are actually trying to learn. So at different stages of the product, you're trying to learn different things. In the beginning, you're trying to validate potential ideas. So when what we saw from Micah's talk around design sprints, the very first thing you're doing is your paper prototypes. You're trying to test different concepts. So in there, you're looking for what can you do as fast as possible. The next stage up, you might be trying to validate the features. So you might want to go to a higher level of fidelity. So there I talk about grayscale paper. Because again, we want to be making changes quite quickly. You want to test out your features. Next up from there, we're looking at how do we validate the design. So now you might be going into color prototyping. Then after that, you might want to validate the experience. That's when you want to validate the full end-to-end experience for a product. Now I'm trying to memorize.
Do you need slides? Or you're doing really well. Like I'm impressed.
I can just keep standing and talking.
We might maybe grab it off your machine and put it on another.
Yeah, you can do that.
Laptop.
So what I'll do is I'll just flick across the slides as you're doing that, and then I can keep talking through things. Because I don't actually need the slides necessarily. So that's exactly what it is. And so the last thing we had there was validating the end-to-end business model. So similar to validating the end-to-end experience, which you can get a lot of the business model factored in there, the next up is actually building and launching the product. And how can you build it and launch it as fast as possible, right? And that is, in a sense, a form of prototyping as well. I'll talk about it in more detail as we get through the talk. Now, in terms of that, what are the major assumptions that you guys can think of when looking at a product? When we talk about testing assumptions, what are the major assumptions you have across the product? Yeah? Is it actually, you're going to actually hit the right customer and people are actually going to buy it? So buying it, there's a whole lot of assumptions that fall within there. So you have do I have the right customer if I targeted them? Have I tackled a problem effectively for that customer, a real problem? Is my solution better than the existing solutions for them? Have I found the right channel to market? Now, this is a really important one as well and should be factored into how you go about doing your prototyping. So you could make really cool prototypes and go out and test them. But if you don't test them across an appropriate marketing channel, you've only really tested something once it's in someone's hands. You need to be able to test that end-to-end process of how can I test if someone's actually going to get it into their hands in the first place. So that's really important as well. And then finally, like we talked about with buying it, can they buy it for enough money that justifies the amount of investment you're going to put into it. So that's your cost and your revenue, right? So these are all the different reasons why we're prototyping. Now I'm going to just jump onto our slides again. So we spoke about it's about learning. You have different prototypes for different types of for different challenges. There's a number of different factors you do need to consider when choosing your approach. So one is cost. So how much money you're willing to invest at this point in time, depending on the context, on the organization, on the type of problem you're looking at, that's going to change. If you're a startup, you're not going to have any money at all. Everything's going to be a paper prototype. If you're a large corporate, they throw money around like it's nothing. You might end up doing a high fidelity prototype purely because that's what's been demanded of the people that you've been engaged from. Now, I've tackled this. I don't recommend it, but it might be what you're asked to do and you might have no choice. Next is speed. So how fast can you get to market with your prototype in order to get your feedback? All right, so again, depending on your context, depending on the space that you're playing in, you might want to get to market extremely quickly, or you might want to take your time. Then alongside speed, there's speed to make small changes, so small changes to the design or small changes to features, and speed to make big changes. The speed to make big changes really sits to the lower end of validating ideas and features. That's where you need a lot of speed to make big changes. Versus when you get to the top end of validating experience, ideally you've gone through a path where you don't need to make those big changes, and so you ideally want that speed to make smaller changes once you get to the other end of the scale.
So I think we have to, at this moment, say we don't know what's broken.
Maybe.
Very sorry. We've tried a couple of different cables and a couple of different laptops.
No.
If you're happy to keep going without slides on that, if you want me to draw anything on the wall, I can keep
going. Yeah, let's just do it.
I'm very sorry about that.
That's all right. It'll be a good test of my presentation skills. So we spoke about validating ideas. So first stage of prototyping, validating ideas in our prototype talk. This is where you're looking at paper prototyping. Right, so that's what we saw in the design sprints deck where you had a picture. And that was the different sketches of what you could see there. So I can now make up slides because you can't see them anyway. And so what's great about paper prototyping, it's extremely low cost, extremely easy to make very big changes very quickly, which is really important when you're at the concepting phase. You don't want to go to that level of high fidelity where you're going to throw work away. And it's really easy to make small changes as well, really fast to get to market. The con with paper prototypes is there's no real customer value, obviously. One of the tools I've got up here is prototyping on paper. So obviously you've got your pen and paper to build your prototypes. Prototyping on paper, there's a bunch of tools out there where you can take photos of your screens and then connect them using hotspots to make essentially a working prototype. I've got another talk I do on Untitled Prototypes where we walk through all of that. This, again, I highly recommend doing this. I don't see any scenario where you wouldn't start with a paper prototype and use prototyping on paper to go out and test it with your customers. There's almost no scenario where that wouldn't be the most valuable place to start your efforts, right? That said, for the next part, this is where it starts to change. Validating features, I'm just calling these out as a place to start in terms of what you could do at this point in time, but I'm not saying that you should follow this order because that's not necessarily going to be the most efficient thing for you. So in terms of validating features, I call this grayscale digital. So that's where you're producing a digital prototype that's going to be clickable. It's going to be a level of fidelity where it's easy to make small changes to add different features and iterate on it quite quickly, but you're not going into that level of detail where you're getting into Photoshop and doing pixel pushing. So again, extremely low cost, slightly more expensive than paper, but really not by much. Very fast to make small changes, faster than paper to make small changes, at least it should be. And it's really great to test, right? One of the key things about grayscale digital is that once you get into pixel pushing, when you get into color digital, that's when you're having conversations around features, people start talking to you about, you're saying, oh, I'm testing out the features for this. People say, oh, the features look okay. I'm not so sure about the color, or I'm not so sure about the position of this button. At this point of what you're testing is validating features. You don't care about that kind of thing. So you really want to be focusing on grayscale digital so you don't get people sucked into that conversation, which they inevitably do once they see something of a certain level of fidelity. So one of my favorite tools to use here is Balsamiq. I can't recommend it enough. It's basically a digital prototyping tool where all of the components of the prototype look sketched in themselves. So they sort of encourage that type of thinking. And then other tools you can see, so we spoke about in the design sprints, is InVision and Sketch, great tools that you can use here. Of course, you can add color to those as well and take them into the next level of fidelity. And then Adobe XD is a free one that Adobe's brought out, which is actually quite useful as well. That said, with something like InVision, it's really helpful is you get a lot more advanced functionality in terms of making something a lot more realistic. So you can start to make your prototype have animations to it and make it so that you can scroll up and see buttons or add drop downs into your functionality. So then we get into validating design. So we've gone through validating ideas, validating features, and hey, what happened? Cool. Okay, so now we're into validating design. I'm gonna show you the first slide just because it orientates around everything. So this is what we're talking about. So ideas, features with my pretty icons, which added a lot to this as well. So you've got your ideas, which is your paper prototype, your features or your hot air balloon, your design, which I know that looks like a blob, that's supposed to be the Wright brothers plane. And then validating experience, so your airliner, and then finally validating your end-to-end business model. So that's launching out your products. I've got two examples there. One, you've got the Concorde there, Concorde, and then the Falcon Heavy, which will become clear as we get through the talk. So what we're talking about here. So validating design. So this is where we get into color digital, right? So in terms of what we're looking at, quick to make large changes, quick to make relatively quick to make large changes, I should say. It's not super quick, not compared to paper or grayscale. It's relatively quick to make large changes, depending on what tool you use and depending on how much you've invested in pixel pushing across your platform. Relatively quick to go from prototyping to testing compared to later models. Again, no deliverable customer value, right? So that's something important to keep in mind, that at this point in time, the customer still hasn't received any value. And the cost is low to medium. You're starting to get into a stage where you're starting to get some significantly wasted effort depending on what you do and where you get to with your prototype. Great tools to use, obviously Photoshop being the classic one there. Pro.io, if no one's checked that out, that's a really cool one to check out. You can get a free trial on it. And Azure gives you a whole lot of really crazy functionality, although you're almost getting into coding landscape once you start using that. Finally, validating experience. So this is a working experience of the product. So this is where you're essentially able to test a large number of your assumptions. With validating experience, this is where you get to learn the largest amount around your product. And this is where you're actually starting to actually provide customer value. So with validating experience or delivering the end-to-end model, does anyone have an idea of what they've seen that might constitute validating experience without actually building the product? So one thing I was working with one organization, this was actually in a design sprint, and they said, we want to add a chatbot to our website so that people can engage with the chatbot. We think this is going to be a great way that we can increase engagement and be able to answer questions automatically. And they said, okay, cool, let's put together a prototype, just a design, and then we'll test the design with people, and then we'll see if they like the design, then we're going to go out and actually build out the product, which was going to cost them however many thousands of dollars. I said to them, do you have chat enabled on your website as a module? I said, yeah, sure, why not? I said, cool, okay, we're going to add chat to one of the pages, we're going to call it a chatbot, and then we're going to have a real person behind it. Anyone accessing your website has no idea there's a real person behind it. They just think it's a chatbot that's really clever. What we get to see, and we launched it, and what we got to see is exactly what people wanted from the chatbot, exactly what type of answers they were expecting, and then gave us an idea of what things we would actually need to code. And not only that, we provided real customer value because people went, oh, wow, this company has a chatbot on their website. And we were seeing that we developed this in all of 10 minutes just by activating it on one of the web pages. So this is an example where, yeah, it was a feature of a page, but we essentially built out that entire experience of using that chatbot. Other examples, there was a food delivery company. Well, they weren't really a company at this point in time. They said, oh, we think we can do, it was one of the vegetable delivery companies. We think we can set up this whole platform. It's going to be online. It's going to be all automated throughout all the providers and service and all the vegetable shops across local vegetable shops. And everything will be automated and we'll have this whole system set up. They went and they looked at all the logistics of what it was going to take to set up this platform, set up the website, set up all the networks of drivers and shops. And it was going to cost them a huge amount of money. So what they did is they did a mail drop in the local suburb. They got a number of customers on board. They set up a basic website, which was just a basic form where people could order their vegetables. And so this is a downloaded form. So they download the form, fill it in manually, and then just scan up a picture, right? So all fully manual, nothing built. These guys weren't really tech heavy themselves. And then when they got the order, one of the founders jumped in his car, drove up to the veggie shop, packed everything into the box, drove up, dropped it off the person's house. So thereby they were able to test the entire business model with building almost nothing on the website. You're talking about a day's worth of effort on the website and no effort in terms of getting drivers together or getting shops involved or anything like that. They just went off, started the business, and were able to test it end to end. They could establish what it would actually take to get everything up and running. What were any process hiccups that would occur because they actually had real customers? What customers were going to say when they didn't get the vegetables that they like or the apple was a bit bruised and how they could handle those types of things. And most of all, were people willing to pay for this? So through my channel, my marketing channel, which was in that instance was mail drops, would we actually get buy-in across this local suburb? And was it worth it for us to continue? So they were able to validate almost every single assumption across their business model besides looking at the full cost of actually developing and running this company. Which then brings us, and so that's the example I'm speaking about. So that's a Wizard of Oz test that I'm speaking about there. Where they're doing that, it's behind the curtains. Everything else is just a bunch of monkeys running around behind the curtains. But for the customer's perspective, everything looks like the real product end to end. So this is super valuable. I really like, my preference usually is shooting from paper prototype to Wizard of Oz if I can, depending what I'm doing. Particularly in certain types of design sprints, again, a really good example, I'll shoot from paper prototype to Wizard of Oz, and you can get those types of tests done all within a week, and it's quite easy. Finally, validating the end-to-end business model. So this is where, this is what we're talking about, it's basically build and launch. So we're building and launching our product. So traditional development, building and launching, this isn't prototyping anymore, this is actually building out products. But just to compare to what I'm going to present in a second. It's high customer value. Obviously, you're delivering the end-to-end solution. But it's very, very high cost, exceptionally hard to change once you've launched, and very, very slow to deliver. That's our traditional approach. It just is that way, right? Tools, obviously, development and developers, if you're looking into digital products. Those are your tools to make this happen. Now, this is a startup that I've been working with in Melbourne, Melbourne-based startup, and they do a low-code build and launch. So there's a number of low-code platforms that are starting to pop up around the world. The one that I'm working with in Melbourne, which is currently called PodCap, but soon to be changed to Arpeggio. And OutSystems is one of the bigger ones. I think they're overseas somewhere. Very, very expensive to use OutSystems, which is why it's a bit of a space that we decide to move into. So what you get, you basically get to launch your products, high customer value, but it's a low to medium cost to deliver and quick to make small changes and quick to deliver. So very, very different to a traditional approach. So Belka and OutSystems spoke about, but this is some screenshots of what this beta looks like. I'm not crazy enough to bring the real thing up on screen because the demo gods are sure to set my computer on fire if I were to do that. But basically, this is what the website looks like right now if you go to it. And you can click on the edit icon in the corner, which is this one right up here, and it will take you to this screen over here where you can edit the website of Botcat live, and everything's drag and drop. So every single thing you see here is drag and drop. Now, there are a lot of platforms out there. You might be like, oh, this is just like Squarespace or WordPress. I can drag and drop on those as well. You can. One of the things we've done is it's all built in React. It's using material design, and it's taking a lot of the questions away from, is this going to be responsive? So the responsive design is built into the platform. Everything you put in here is real code. And in addition to that, one of the biggest things that you can see here as I'm going through, I'm editing the platform as an example. You can go through, you can check out parts. One of the biggest things we've got here, which is different to things like WordPress, is drag and drop code in terms of actions. So you can see here I've got this action, which is a sign up action. I can then drag that onto a button or drag it onto a page, all the functionality you could possibly need in terms of building out your web app. And then when you get into the action itself, that's where you can drag. If you're looking at those themselves, those are code snippets. But essentially, from a botgap user's perspective, it's just I'm going to do this, and then I'm going to do this, and then I'm going to do this, right? Now, you can write your own code as well by dragging your own little snippets. But majority, as we build more snippets into the platform, it's going to get to the point where you'll have all the different code snippets you'll need to essentially build what you want. What I don't have screenshots here of as well is the data integration layer, where I can say, okay, this form is going to go to a database. It spins up a database in Amazon, and then it's just dragging, connecting the different parts of your form elements to database columns, which then creates your database, and that gets filled out. Or if I've got an existing database, that just loads up and says this database has these columns, and then I can just drag those into a screen, and that's going to load the data in automatically. So everything is drag and drop. The other side of that is API integration. Again, works exactly the same as the data manager, where everything is drag and drop. If I've got an existing API, the platform goes, cool, I can see that API, I can see what it's after. Tell me what you want it to connect to if you're pulling information in, or tell me what you want to connect to if you're sending information out into your API. So what this is essentially doing is it's automating a lot of what is sometimes the really tedious parts of the development. Being an amateur developer myself, I can talk to it to some degree. I'm sure anyone who here is a professional developer. When you're sitting there working with adding all these form fields into a form, that's not fun. You've done it a million times before. I don't want to do it again. It'd be so much greater if the designer, when they designed the screen, was actually building the application for me. From the designer perspective, you have the other side of the cost. I've built my screen in Photoshop. I've made it look amazing. I've handed it across to the developer, and they've just done something completely different. It doesn't make any sense. Why did this happen? Never happens. Of course, we all communicate perfectly in that, right? So these things happen all the time, right? It's frustrating for the designer because then they're going back and they're doing rework on their work. It's frustrating for the developer because they end up doing rework as well. So what this is doing is essentially joining the designer and the developer at the hip. So they're working directly together, where the designer is only doing the most value-add activities for them. The things that they find the most fun, they get to do. And as from the design side, when you build your design, the one thing you want to see is you want to see it in people's hands. You want to see them using it. With this, they get to see that so much faster, right? As opposed to doing a design in Photoshop and then having to wait months for something to get prioritized into development, and finally for someone to work on it, and then it to end up maybe in customers' hands, maybe working. If you're in a large corporate, that certainly doesn't happen. It happens a lot slower than that. So this is essentially, I think, should be the way that people start developing, where everyone's working hand in hand. Everyone's only doing the things they love to do and not wasting their time on wasted effort. What I've got here is just a quick pick. There's actually a full infographic I've got which describes the entire talk, which I'll shoot the link across to, I'll post it in the Meetup group so you guys can get it. Essentially, the entire talk is in this infographic. This is one component of it, which goes through all the different things you might be trying to learn and then the different tools you can use at those stages. And then it's also, this is another part of the infographic we put together, where I've dramatically shown the massive drop in benefit when you get to build. Yes, of course, I made it, so obviously I'm going to make it look like that, but I think it's true. And then the massive benefit when you get to low-code launch. And you can see the massive benefit from Grayscale Paper Prototype, the huge benefit you get from that when compared to other methods, and how it steadily drops off. So with that, I'm not going to go into, we've only got 15 minutes left, I might just jump into questions. So I'll skip over the rest. I think, Rick, will we send these packs out as well? Yeah, cool. Okay, so we'll send the packs out, you'll get all the info here, the fancy information about product development, life cycles and all that jazz, but I know you guys have seen a lot of that stuff before. So with that, any questions? Oh, yeah.